The story begins with a famous writer named Melville, who traveled a long way to a remote whaling town on Nantucket Island. But he wasn't there to meet just anyone. He had come searching for the one man who had survived a horrifying event at sea, a story so terrifying that people still whispered about it years later. The writer knocked on the door of an old house. An elderly woman answered and assumed he was a customer. She politely told him the shop was closed and asked him to come back another time. But the writer quickly introduced himself. "I'm not a customer, I'm a writer. I've come here to meet just one man." The woman opened the door and called for her husband. Sitting at a table, carefully carving small model boats, was an old sailor named Thomas. The moment the writer saw him, he knew he had found the right man. But as soon as they faced each other, Thomas lost his temper. "Have you lost your mind?" he snapped. "You traveled all this way just to see me?" The writer stayed calm. "I'm here to hear your story." He placed a wallet full of money on the table and said, "If you tell me the whole truth about what really happened to the Essex, every dollar here is yours." Without a second thought, Thomas pushed the offer away. "What exactly do you want to know? If it's just a story you're after, go read the official records. Everything's written there." But the writer shook his head. "I don't want what's written on paper. I want the truth about the whale that only you saw with your own eyes." The moment Thomas heard that, his anger flared again. "I don't know anything. Now leave." Disappointed, the writer turned to walk away. But then Thomas's wife stopped him. She apologized for her husband's behavior and quietly said, "He's never told this story to anyone, not even me. Please, let me talk to him." She begged Thomas to let go of the burden he'd been carrying all these years. For a long moment, the room fell silent. Finally, Thomas agreed. The truth was, they were struggling badly. Money had become a real problem, and they desperately needed it. Taking a deep breath, Thomas looked at the writer and said, "I'll only tell you as much as a man can bear to hear, because this isn't just a story, it's a nightmare that changed my life forever." With those words, Thomas drifted back into the past. The story takes us to 1820, when one of the most dangerous businesses in the world was whaling. Back then, whale oil was worth more than gold. It lit homes, fueled businesses, and made fortunes. Hunting whales wasn't just a job, it was an obsession. Sailors even placed bets on which ship would return with the largest haul of whale oil. That's when we meet Owen Chase, a highly skilled and experienced sailor. He had a loving wife and lived a simple but happy life. He served as the first mate, the highest-ranking officer after the captain, for a major whaling company. One day, the company's owners called him into their office. They told him their most valuable and largest whaling ship, the Essex, was about to begin its next voyage. Owen couldn't hide his excitement. He was sure this time he'd finally be promoted to captain, just as he'd been promised. But a moment later, all his hopes came crashing down. Instead, the company gave command of the Essex to George Pollard, the owner's son. Owen was furious. It was obvious that family connections mattered more than experience. The owners tried to calm him down. "Next time, the captain's position will be yours." They even offered him a raise. But this time, Owen wasn't willing to trust another promise. "If I'm really going to be the next captain, I want that promise in writing." After a brief discussion, the company finally agreed. After that, Owen began preparing for the voyage. Before he left, the fear in his wife's eyes was impossible to miss. She was pregnant, and more than anything, she wanted her husband by her side during such an important time. But Owen was determined to earn enough money to give their child a better future. When she realized she couldn't change his mind, she gently took his hand and said, "Promise me, promise you'll come home alive." Then she gently took the locket off her own neck and slipped it around his, asking him to wear it as a reminder to come back home. Meanwhile, George Pollard was saying goodbye to his father. His father proudly told him, "Go out there and come back a winner. And remember, you are the captain of that ship, not their friend. You're their superior. Never forget that, and never let them forget it either." Soon, the Essex was finally ready to leave port. A huge crowd gathered along the harbor to see the crew off. Among them was a skinny young cabin boy named Thomas. Yes, the very same Thomas who was telling this story decades later. This was his very first voyage at sea. Owen's childhood friend was also part of the crew. Not long after departure, Owen and Captain George had their first real conversation, and the tension between them was obvious from the start. George constantly reminded everyone that he was the captain. Even though Owen had far more experience, he had no choice but to follow orders. As the ship sailed farther into the Atlantic, trouble arrived sooner than expected. Without warning, the Essex drifted into dangerous waters, and the ship nearly ran aground. The situation became critical, but Owen's quick thinking and experience saved everyone on board. The crew praised him for preventing disaster. Everyone, except Captain George. Instead of feeling grateful, George grew jealous of Owen's skill. That night night at dinner, he deliberately humiliated him. With a smug smile, he said, "At the end of the day, you're still just a farmer's son." Owen burned with anger, but he refused to argue. He quietly stood up and told the crew, "We've got an early morning tomorrow." At that moment, it became clear just how divided life was aboard the ship. The officers enjoyed comfort, while the crew was treated like servants and fed poor-quality food. The next morning, George continued ordering Owen around. Owen kept following his commands, even when he disagreed. Then Owen spotted something terrifying on the horizon, a massive storm rolling straight toward them. He immediately warned the captain, "If we don't change course now, this ship won't survive." But George ignored him. Claiming he wanted to test the crew, he ordered the ship to sail directly into the storm. Within minutes, enormous waves surrounded the Essex. Chaos erupted across the deck. Owen shouted, "Bring the sails down now, or we're all dead." Still, George refused to listen. His pride was putting every life on board at risk. When the storm became impossible to control, Owen finally ignored the captain's orders. He cut the sail lines himself, sacrificing part of the rigging to save the ship. After an intense struggle, they barely escaped the storm. But instead of admitting his mistake, George demanded that Owen apologize. Then he made an even worse decision. He announced they would return home without hunting a single whale, and he planned to blame all the damage on Owen for disobeying the captain's orders. Owen couldn't believe what he was hearing. "If we go back empty-handed," he said, "the company won't be the only one that suffers. Every family depending on this voyage will lose everything." After a long argument, George finally gave in. Instead of turning back, the Essex sailed even deeper into the open ocean. None of them realized they were heading straight toward the deadliest predator the sea had ever known. Nearly 3 months later, they finally reached waters filled with whales. Without wasting a second, the whalers climbed into their small hunting boats and headed out. Owen chased a massive whale with his harpoon. The whale fought with everything it had, but in the end, Owen brought it down. The enormous carcass was tied with ropes and slowly pulled back to the Essex. Then came the hardest part of the job, extracting the whale oil. To do that, someone had to climb inside the whale's body. Since Thomas was the smallest and thinnest member of the crew, the job fell to him. As the days passed, they couldn't find another whale. Meanwhile, their food supplies began running dangerously low. With no other choice, they stopped at a small island to gather fresh food and water. There, they met another whaling captain whose condition was horrifying. He was missing an arm. The captain shared the terrifying story of his last voyage. He said, "We reached the offshore grounds, the heart of the ocean. The waters were packed with whales, enough to fill over 3,000 barrels of whale oil. But then, we encountered a giant white whale. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was nearly 100 feet long, far bigger and stronger than any normal whale. It destroyed my entire ship by itself. I was the only one who made it out alive." Hearing his story, Owen's crew laughed. They thought he was making the whole thing up. Humiliated, the captain walked away. But George wasn't laughing. Greed had already taken over. He wanted those rich whaling grounds. And more than that, he wanted to kill the legendary white whale. He believed that if he succeeded, his name would be remembered forever. Driven by ambition, the Essex sailed into the unknown. Nearly 14 months into the voyage, they finally reached the waters where the mysterious whale had been seen. The crew climbed into their whaleboats with their harpoons. A massive pod of whales surrounded them, and the hunt began. Then, without warning, something slammed into Owen's boat. The impact flipped it over instantly, throwing everyone into the freezing ocean. When they surfaced, they finally saw it. The enormous white whale. It looked exactly as the injured captain had described. Its sheer size left everyone speechless. A moment later, it disappeared beneath the waves. The other hunters took the opportunity to harpoon another whale, but the white whale saw what happened and charged straight toward the Essex. The first hit shook the entire ship. The second ripped through its hull. The third doomed it. The Essex slowly began sinking beneath the sea. Watching from his whaleboat, George panicked and rushed back. But by then, it was already too late. He ordered everyone to abandon ship. The crew managed to save only a small amount of food and supplies before climbing into 3 tiny whaleboats. Owen stayed behind for a moment to grab a rifle. As flames spread through the whale oil on board, powerful explosions tore through the ship. He barely escaped by diving into the ocean and swimming back to the boats. The next morning, they studied their maps, hoping to find the safest route home. Instead, another violent storm crashed into them. During the storm, Owen's childhood friend suffered a serious head injury. As the days passed, Owen cared for him as best he could, but the rest of the crew began seeing the injured man as a burden. A month later, their food and fresh water were completely gone. Everyone was starving. Then one sailor spotted land in the distance. Hope returned instantly. They rowed toward the island with everything they had, but just as they neared shore, Owen sensed something was wrong. The white whale appeared again. It smashed into their boats, leaving them in pieces. The crashing waves carried the survivors onto the island. By then, they looked more like wild survivors than sailors. They ate anything they could find just to stay alive. Owen also realized that the locket his wife had given him was gone, leaving him heartbroken. George ordered a signal fire to be built on the highest point of the island. If a ship passed by, the smoke might save them, but the island was completely deserted. While searching for food, they discovered a cave. Inside, they froze. The cave was filled with human skeletons. It was clear they weren't the first people stranded there, and no one had come to rescue the others. For the first time, everyone truly believed they might never make it home. Eventually, they repaired the remaining boats and prepared to sail again. A few men decided to stay behind, including Owen's badly injured friend. Before leaving, Owen promised him, "I'll come back for you, I swear." 48 days later, the survivors drifting across the ocean were barely alive. Hunger had pushed them beyond their limits. Then one of the sailors died. At first, they planned to give him a proper burial at sea, but desperation changed everything. To stay alive, they made the most heartbreaking decision of their lives. They chose to eat the body of their fallen crewmate. It was a choice that haunted every one of them, but by then, survival was their only option. Present day. As Thomas reaches this part of the story, his voice begins to shake. His eyes fill with tears. For a few moments, he can't say a word. Just then, his wife quietly walks into the room. After hearing the painful truth, she breaks down in tears. She gently tells him, "Please, finish the story." Thomas takes a deep breath and continues. Another month had passed. By now, hunger had pushed the survivors beyond the edge of sanity. With no food left, they made a horrifying decision. They drew lots. Whoever picked the losing one would sacrifice their life so the others could survive. This time, fate chose Captain George. He handed his pistol to his cousin and quietly said, "Do it." But his cousin couldn't pull the trigger. Instead, he turned the gun on himself. The survivors were forced to make the same heartbreaking choice once again. Days later, the giant white whale appeared one last time. Owen raised his harpoon, but the moment he looked into the whale's eyes, he stopped. He realized this wasn't just another animal. It was the true ruler of the ocean. Owen lowered his weapon. The white whale simply turned and disappeared into the endless sea without attacking. A few days later, a passing ship spotted George's lifeboat. At last, they were rescued, but the rescue captain was horrified when he saw human bones inside the boat. Meanwhile, Owen and Thomas had drifted far away in another direction. They were only moments from death. Then, a ship appeared on the horizon, and finally, they were rescued too. Months later, the survivors returned home. The entire town was stunned. Everyone had believed they were dead. On the dock, Owen's wife was waiting for him. The two embraced tightly, and for the very first time, Owen reunited with his 3-year-old daughter who had grown up while he was lost at sea. Before parting ways, Owen gave Thomas his whale pin, the badge awarded only to successful whalers. Not long afterward, Owen and Captain George were called in for an official inquiry. Owen knew the company didn't want the truth. If people believed a monster ruled the sea, they might stop hunting whales, and the entire whale oil industry could collapse. After everything they had been through, Owen looked at George and said, "Now it's your duty as captain. Tell them the truth." After a long silence, George finally confessed everything, but the company buried the real story and released a false version to the public. Later, Owen tried to start over. He even returned to the island to rescue his injured friend, but he arrived too late. Back in the present, Thomas finishes his story and asks the writer, "Are you really going to tell the world what happened?" The writer smiles and replies, "Yes, but I'll tell it through a novel inspired by the truth." As he prepares to leave, Thomas stops him and says, "I heard there's a man in Pennsylvania who drilled into the ground and found oil. I still can't believe it. Until now, oil has only come from whales." A few months later, the writer completed his novel. Its title was Moby Dick. That book would go on to become one of the most famous stories ever written. And with that, this unforgettable true tale of survival, sacrifice, and the terrifying power of the sea comes to an end.